can get started. Hey, folks, welcome again to this session of presenting to executives and how do you go about it. So, I want to welcome our host panelists. We have Balaji, Nancy, Rohan, and myself, Sanjay. Just as a quick icebreaker, one thing that I have noticed is people find it hard to pronounce people's names. So I wanted each of the panelists to give themselves an intro on how they pronounce their names. So who wants to go first?
I can skip, right? Because I have a very normal American name.
Okay. So yeah, we are skipping
Maybe,
Nancy.
yeah,
Yeah,
maybe
go ahead.
I could try to pronounce your names and then you can educate me.
Why not?
Okay.
Okay.
Hi. Hello, Sanjay.
Well, I I think Sanjay is not the right way you would go about pronouncing the name,
Tell
but
me.
Sanjay, yeah. So it is the pronunciation and the emphasis is on the first syllable usually. So it is Sanjay,
Wait, sorry.
Sanjay. So
Sanjay.
just
Sanjay.
think of it like the sun, right?
Oh,
Sun, sun,
oh, okay. Sanjay,
Sanjay. Yeah.
not
Okay.
Sanjay.
No, not
Okay.
Sanjay. Okay.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Sanjay.
All right.
Was that good? Was that better?
It was a little better, but I think it
Sorry.
takes practice. It takes practice. Okay.
Sanjay.
Sanjay. Yep.
Sanjay.
Okay. You
Bal-
wanna pronounce? Okay, go ahead.
Balaji.
It's actually pronounced Balaji.
You're 0 for 2,
Balaji.
Nancy.
Balaji. Not
Yep,
Balaji.
not Balaji.
Nice to meet you,
Nice to meet you
Balaji.
too, Nancy.
Is
That's
that slightly is that slightly
that's a lot
better?
better.
Okay, thank you so much.
I mean, if my if pronouncing my first name is difficult, pronouncing my last name is going to be absolutely hard. So we'll skip
Okay.
that part.
All right. Nice to meet you, Rohan.
I'll take that. I'll take that. I think that's a win for you, Nancy.
Is
You
it?
get half a point there. Yeah, I've had variations from Rohan to Rohan with a J if I'm down towards the Spanish side of things or towards the Mexican border, but it's Rohan. For me, I think a good reference for folks is Lord of the Rings. I think folks here would have either read the books or watched the movies. And no, my parents did not read Tolkien before I was born. So this is the inspiration came from somewhere else.
Thank you so
All
much
right.
for educating me.
All
Pronunciation is
right.
very important because name is what we identify as. So thank you.
Totally. Yeah.
Uh, just wa- I just wanted to highlight that sometimes we sort of let people call us some names, and we are code switching at times, and it is a bit of a challenge for for me, and I'm assuming for a lot of other folks as well. So
For sure.
Yeah. I wonder how we do if we go into our executive presentation and the person we are presenting to pronounces us or pronounces our name wrong, and how would we handle that if we are meeting them for the first time? But maybe that's a good cue for us to kick this party off.
yeah. That being said, the first sort of question that I usually get is that people work hard, but they don't know how to showcase themselves. So, Nancy, would you like to kick us off in how would you sort of go about defining the problem?
Yes. You can see this square on my shoulder. Okay, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, cool. I was thinking about this topic and I wanted to take a step back and just reflect. Why is this such a frequently asked question? Why do people want to know how to effectively present in front of executives? Well, like everything we do in life, when we're working toward a new goal, when there's a new milestone that we're trying to achieve, I claim most of the work is mindset work. And the tactical work is actually easier to do than mindset. This is my claim, at least. So I claim 60% of the work is mindset and 40% is tactic. And with mindset, what does mindset mean? It means what is our perspective? What is our value? What do we believe in? And what are we conditioned to believe? That is what mindset means. And when we're looking at mindset, the first thing we should look at is what is the underlying need behind this question and behind this desire to present well in front of executive team? Well, that underlying need is, I believe that I work really hard and I feel that I want and I deserve recognition. But what does recognition look like? What does recognition even mean? Why do I want that? Well, let's look at what recognition is. It could be new opportunities are given to us. It could be new scope that is added to our plate. It's praises coming from the leadership team. It's good performance reviews. It's promotions and raises. But why do we want these things? It's because this is what we're taught. This is how we're conditioned growing up in school, in society, in our culture. Recognition is what we should go after. And therefore, we are all wired this way. This is why we're all trying to go after this quote unquote thing called recognition. So, with that viewpoint in mind, now we have a common pain point because everyone is trying to go after recognition. And that common pain point is doing a good job doesn't mean that we're going to get the recognition we want. It is not one-to-one. But that's also very different from how we were educated. In school, if we do a good job, we're going to get a good grade. And then we're going to get A's on our report card. But when we start working, that tactic doesn't work anymore. Just doing a good job does not guarantee that we're going to get recognition. And that's why it is painful for maybe all of us who are working today. And we think the solution could be, let's present well in front of executives team, and that is going to give us the recognition that we want. We think
I'm
this
sorry
is the
for
solution.
interjecting, but I'm like particularly interested to hear your take on this, Nancy, because I know you've spent a bunch of time at Facebook and other places like Roku, and I know that often that those kind of places are like the gold standard for product work, especially. So really excited to hear more details on this. And I also realized that I don't think you sort of introduced your product background
Oh, I'm so sorry.
to the folks
Yeah.
here. So yeah, bear with us, folks, as we get familiar with the format.
Yeah, let me introduce it. I was just thinking, I'm just talking to my friends. My name is Nancy. I am a PM coach. I have been in product management for over 10 years. And before product, I was in engineering. And I've also held leadership positions when I was at Facebook and most recently at Roku. And this topic actually came about in some of the conversations I was having just with friends. And I thought this is a very great topic. And let me invite the other experts on the Korea platform to do this together so we could look at this topic and have a great discussion. So let me go back. Where was I? Okay. So we feel that executive presentation can get us that recognition, but executive presentation isn't the only factor that goes into recognition. We know that, right? We know that how managers advocate for us, how our peers perceive you can all go into whether we get that recognition that we want. And for sure, executive presentation then affects how your manager sees you. It then affects how your peers perceive you because it's all interrelated. And that's why this topic is such an important topic for us to spend some time on. But the bottom line is, though, if what we want is recognition, then we really should be looking at communication overall and not just on executive presentations. But we should also know that executive presentation is an important factor in our communication skills on a high level. So I want all of us to set a macro goal for this discussion. The macro goal should be, let's work on communication skills and not just looking at executive presentations. So with this macro goal in mind, let's dig deeper into our mindset. First of all, we need to recognize that there is an emotional component that affects how we show up. It affects how we communicate. So with this understanding, we should know now that first step to working on communication is working on your own emotions, because our own emotions affect how we show up. So let's work on emotions first. And we also should recognize that this is not an easy thing. This is not something that was taught in school when we're 3 or 4 years old. My daughter right now, she started learning math and science and chemistry when she was 3. So imagine if we started learning about effective communication skills at the age of 3, we would be so much better at it today. Right, so now that we know that we're kind of playing catch up compared to all the other subjects that we learned in school, this is a new subject, relatively new subject for all of us. And with anything new, we can learn it. And when we're learning a new skill, what do we need to do? We need to practice and practice and practice, right? That is how we get better at anything that is new. And now that we have this, now that we understand this mindset, let's start talking about tactics. With every problem that we want to solve, we should always apply product thinking principles. And what does that mean? In product thinking principles, we always think about the audience or thinking about the users. Who are they? What do they want? What are their pain points? What are their needs? So let's look at the executive persona. Who are they? They have tens and hundreds and thousands of people under them, right? They have very limited time and attention span because they are juggling a million things all the time. And they're worried about things that are very different from what we're worried about. So what does that mean? They don't like details. They likely don't care about our execution plans. They care about impact at the org level or at the company level. So let's first observe what the executives are working on. What do they care about? What stresses are they under? Right? Let's first understand our audience better. And if they know that we're worried about the same things as them, they'll give us bonus points because that doesn't happen very frequently. Like I said, they're worried about things that are very different from us. So if they know that we're worried about the same things as them, that's how we get the brownie points. And if they don't care about what we care about, let's tell them why they should care, right? Let's also help them help us by understanding them a little bit better. So now let's talk about some of the tactical tips. With anything that is important, just like preparing for the SATs, we should practice and over prepare because this is an important milestone. This is like taking the SATs. We should over prepare. But a lot of us are so busy with our jobs that we don't really have time to over prepare for executive presentations. So let's ask our team to help us because doing well in an executive presentation helps not just the presenter, but also helps the entire team. So let's delegate work to other people while the presenter preps. So now I'm going to pass it back to Sanjay and Rohan and Balaji to walk us through some of the other very important things that we could do to do better in our next executive presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. That was very insightful. So, just to recap, you talked about tactics, you talked about mindset, you talked about understanding what the executives want and what they don't have time to think about. So, it is very interesting to hear that. Now that we've heard in terms of defining the problem, I want to hand this over to Rohan and Balaji to talk about how do you come up with solutions for this problem. So who wants to go first, guys?
I can take a stab at it. And yeah, that was awesome, Nancy. I think it took me forever to kind of shift my focus and think about who I'm presenting to and just put myself in the shoes of my director or GM or VP and say, does this person even have, like, why are they trying to cram everything into a half an hour meeting? Why is it that they're reaching for a certain type of question set whereas I have something completely different prepared? It took a long time for me to get to that conclusion. So I think sharing that here, that was super helpful. Thanks for doing that. So before I sort of start talking about the solution as Sanjay sort of framed it, a quick background about who I am and why am I here speaking about this topic, right? So I have about 15 years in product, 15 years experience in product. I've worked on everything from B2B to B2C to hardware to software, startups to medium-sized to large-sized companies. Most recently, I've been at Amazon, where notably I had been working on Amazon Luna, their cloud gaming platform. And from a presentation perspective, I have presented to boards, various kinds of leaders, and folks who are leading teams as well. And I think one thing is clear, that there is certainly value to these things. And that's why I love Nancy's framing, right? It's not just another presentation, it's not just another meeting. We should take it more seriously because of the factors that Nancy mentioned. So let me dive into how I think about it. Very simply, I like to think about it in three steps, right? There is the before the meeting happens, how do you prep? And that goes not just from like how do you prep your own material, but it also goes about like how do you think about structuring the meeting? Who do you want there, and so on and so forth. And we'll dive into that. But then, so the first phase is before the meeting, how do you get ready for it? The second phase is during the meeting, what are some of the things you can and should do? And then the third phase is after the meeting, what are some good practices that could help you stay on top of this, right? So with that, and Nancy and Balaji, whenever you feel like it, please do jump in. But let me kick off with the how to prep, right? In my head, one of the first things I like to think about is let's ask ourselves the question, what is the purpose of the presentation, right? What are we trying to deliver? And a good framing for that, because hey, we're PMs, we love to put a frame on everything. And in fact, that's part of our value, right? But a good frame to think about this comes from this guy who some of you may know. He's a popular figure in Silicon Valley, Andrew Bosworth, right? Known as Boz. He's been the CTO of Facebook, or Meta now, for I think for a little bit. Before that, he had held various leadership positions. He talks about this as well. One of the framings I like or his framing is inform, discuss, or decide. Is this meeting, even if it's to leadership, is this meeting to inform them about something? Is it to discuss a topic and just sort of solicit generic feedback? Or is it to make a critical decision and close on it, like a go, no go kind of a decision? And think you're the owner of the meeting. You're the one who is driving that particular agenda. You need to have clarity in your mind as to which one of those three formats. And that's just one way to think about it. I'm sure there are many other frames, but that's one of the ways to think about defining the purpose of your meeting for yourself, but also for the people who are going to be on the receiving end of this, right? So that's kind of the first thing I think about. The next thing that I like to think about is format, right? Yeah,
Rohan, I had a quick question there. Like, so you said something around pre-meeting, right? In terms of timelines, what has been your experience? Like, how long have you taken to sort of prepare for a meeting? Just so that people get an idea, because
right.
sometimes people don't know, like, how much
Right.
time people use to prepare for such meetings.
I think look, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, but I can give you sort of the two extremes of it, right? I have had meetings where I have had only a few days to prepare for a meeting to an executive. I have never presented to an executive on the same day or the next day. That that's just not enough time to sort of prepare. And also, guess what? In a bigger organization, you may be able to get away with that in a small startup because everyone's flexible and everyone's trying to work together. But when you look at the scale of the Amazons of the world, you're just not going to get time on the executive's calendar. You'll have to book time just 2-3 weeks ahead of time just to even get that slot in, right? So that automatically gives you the time to prepare. Another quick story I'd like to share is when I first joined Amazon. For those of you who may not know, Amazon is a very writing heavy culture. Balaji definitely knows. I'm giving a little bit of a spoiler about his background. And one of the favorite document formats for product people is PRFAQs, so press release and frequently asked questions. And if you're writing it for a big enough topic, this thing could end up being 6 pages plus few pages of appendix material, right? So there's a lot of writing to be done. And it's not just the quantity, right? You have to really think through exactly how you're going to execute and implement on the idea. And at a time when nobody else has that kind of clarity, right? You're in the ideation phase. Most people don't know what this thing is, let alone how to build it, but you have to be the person driving that clarity and bringing it in. So the story goes, I joined the team. I feel like I had a good 12, 13 years of professional experience under my belt at the time. I'm like, yep, I'm good. I got this. I'm confident. My manager was great. And he's like, hey, Rohan, so you need to, one of the first deliverables is you need to present this PRFAQ to our director, our leadership team. When do you think you can do this by? I'm like, well, I haven't written a lot of PRFAQs before this. This is new to me, but it's a document. It's not like I've never written before. How different can it be from a presentation? I think I'll be able to get it done next week if our director has time. And he's like, how about you schedule it for like 3 weeks from now? Like, yeah, that's way too much time, but sure, whatever, I can do that. And I started writing this thing, and I thought I did a fantastic job. And within a like 3, 4 days, I had a decent, in my mind at least, version of it. And I go back to my manager, who had been at Amazon for 7, 8 years. By that point, he had taken the bar raiser course, which means he has taken this additional training on how to be a top-notch business writer, especially from an Amazon perspective. And he's like, okay, give me like half a day and I'll get back to you with my comments. And I felt like I was back in grade school. I got back a document which was like 80% redlined with changes all over the place. And I felt a lot of emotions. Going back to Nancy's opening, I felt shame. I felt embarrassed. I felt fear. Like, hey, I'm definitely not prepared. I don't know what the hell is going on over here. And my confidence kind of took a big hit. Ego, confidence, combination of those two things. And then I started to dive into the feedback, and I'm like, oh my God, my concepts were probably all wrong. And turns out that most of the feedback was around like, dude, this is way too complicated. You got to dumb it down. You got to simplify it. Now, dumb it down has a bit of a negative connotation to it. The point was, the person, in this case, our director, who's going to read this, has 20 minutes to read it and wants to do a half an hour discussion around it. You, reading 26 pages in 20 minutes means that things have to be written in a very simple, direct, and easy to understand way. And that's just sort of one flavor of what preparation could look like. But long story short, it took me, I think, all of 3 weeks, and I needed like every last minute to get that to a place where not only was the writing easy to understand, in fact, the test was I had to read it to my wife or get her to read it, who had zero context on the topic. And if she could understand 80% of it or 90% of it, I was in a good place. Right. So that's the kind of like that was just the writing part of it. That wasn't even the meeting prep in terms of like, hey, at a high level, what do I want out of this meeting and so on and so forth. So that was a little bit of a sort of monologue, and I apologize for that. But hopefully this gives folks a flavor of the kind of prep that needs to go into these kinds of things.
Thank you.
I love that story. What would happen if, let's say, if you were reporting to a newer manager who hasn't been at Amazon that long? What do you think would have happened?
I think what would have happened is, so on the surface, what would have happened is we would have gone into the review, and that same red line comments that came from my actual manager would have now come from the director instead. But instead of him going meticulously through each and every line, after reading the first paragraph, he would have been like, what? This is not ready. Go back and come back again when you're
Reschedule.
prepared.
Yeah.
Reschedule, right?
Yeah.
That's one thing. And on the surface, that seems harmless enough, right? Big deal. But when you dig deeper, this was a first impression for me. This
Hmm.
was the first time I was getting in front of him. I was a new hire in the team. I was a new hire at Amazon. And maybe I would have had that, hey, this is a newbie, some sort of leeway, right? Like, okay, fine, this person is going to take time to ramp up. But a first impression is still a first impression. And what actually ended up happening was the review went super well. Like, no one said anything at the end of it. And I'm like, is that good? Is that bad? And turns out it was very, very good, because they were there to critically find gaps in the strategy or in the document overall, and they didn't find a whole lot of gaps. But that wasn't because I was some sort of hero who was amazing. That was because I had a shit ton of help along the way,
Mm.
and there was someone who was guiding me through the whole process, right? But to your point, the outcome would have been go back, do this again, and I would have probably left with a bit of a negative impression that I would have had to work doubly or triply hard to sort of undo that damage from that first bad impression.
The prep
One
is so important.
one other point that I'd probably add is like specifically to your question around like what happens if your manager is new to Amazon as well. And this is where like I go back to the product thinking that you mentioned.
Mm.
So Amazon has this unique way of like applying product thinking for any kind of problems. And I think what Amazon did here is they have a couple of things. Like let's say your manager is new, or you don't even want to go to your manager first, and you want to have it reviewed by someone. They have a plugin for doc reviews. They also have a program for doc bar raiser reviews where you can submit your docs. You can have it reviewed by a bar raiser who has absolutely no context of your team. And they will provide you with the most critical feedback, which will help you set up for success. And this goes back to like one of the points that I actually wanted to cover, which is like go in with like as much prep as possible. Like the prep, like do it, redo it, do it over and over and over till you like literally butcher the document.
So,
Yeah.
Balaji, I didn't want to cut you off, but can you do a quick intro of yourself? People don't haven't heard from you yet. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, having spoken so fondly about Amazon, it's quite evident that like I've worked at Amazon. So my name is Balaji. I have over 15 years of experience, total experience, probably around like 8 to 9 years of product experience working across like big tech, smaller companies, and across different industries, right? I think one of the most fascinating roles or touch points in terms of like product is customer experience. For me, I've worked a lot in the last 5 years in the customer experience side of things. Very recently with Amazon, product lead as with the Prime Video's international expansion.
All right. Sounds great. And I know, Rohan, you mentioned something there along the lines of advocacy. So that I leave this as an open-ended question for other people as well. So where do you think advocacy comes in terms of both self-advocacy and for advocacy in terms of others when you are trying to showcase yourself in a presentation to your executives? So, yeah.
Let me take a quick first pass at it. I'm not sure if that question was for me or Balaji or Nancy, but I have a strong opinion on it, so I'll go first. In my opinion, it's tricky. It's one of those things that you can't directly reach for and say, hey, go vouch for me. Like imagine if I came to you, Sanjay, and I said, hey, man, I'm awesome. I'm great. Can you make sure that the next time there is a chance to write a review for me, make it positive? And when you're going to put in a good word or when you're just having a water cooler conversation with our leaders, please go and say that, hey, Rohan's actually pretty awesome. That's almost never going to happen, never going to work, right? Maybe it does in some scenarios, but mostly it won't. And so, what is the other thing that typically works? And this is not the only other way, right? But in my experience, you have to kind of walk the walk, right, and talk, not just talk the talk. You have to go and prove to your partners in that earn trust way. You have to go and earn their trust. And how do you do that? You put in the work, but that even that's not enough, right? You going off into a corner and working your butt off day in and day out and burning the midnight oil and getting everything ready to an amazing place is not enough, because guess what, everybody else is doing the same thing. Even
Mm-hmm,
people who have your interests at heart, even your teammates who actually like you as a person,
mm-hmm,
probably they are doing the same thing. So they don't have the bandwidth to go and absorb the beautiful halo of your amazing work that you've done. So how do you then get around that? And this goes back into the before the meeting, the preparation part of it.
mm-hmm,
Do pre-alignments, right?
mm-hmm,
Book time ahead of time respectfully, make sure you get on their calendars, and hopefully don't leave it until like the week before the meeting.
mm-hmm,
Throughout, broadcast your work, right, in the
mm-hmm,
build up, because at some point when you start working on a new project, eventually it'll culminate in some sort of a leadership review of some sort, right? And
mm-hmm,
so along the journey, keep informing people so that they're not completely caught off guard, like what are you inviting me for, what is this thing you're working on? And then
mm-hmm,
when the actual meeting time comes, well in advance, ideally like 2 weeks in advance, start getting on their calendars. And I typically for a huge meeting would have maybe 3 pre-alignment meetings
mm-hmm,
where if there is a group of people, and that's another thing, I don't
mm-hmm,
love to have like 15 people in the room, right? If I
mm-hmm,
can select the 5, 7, 3, 4, 6 most critical people that are needed to make a decision or get whatever purpose I want, get those
mm-hmm,
people in the room. But even
mm-hmm,
before that, get on their calendars, do pre alignment meetings. And that's when
mm-hmm,
you show your worth. That's when you
mm-hmm,
actually show how prepared you are. That's when you
Mm-hmm.
show how respectful you are to things like debating with them, listening to
Mm-hmm.
their viewpoints as well. Because
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to just call experts into a room and just talk at them, right? You want to take that input and actually
Definitely.
think about it and absorb it. So I'll take a pause there, but
Yeah.
that's sort of how I think about advocacy. And then if you put in the work, your name will likely get out there.
Yeah.
Sure.
I have a slightly different take on that. I see advocacy in two ways, right? Like one, you need a you need someone to advocate for you, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's like the first and foremost thing is like you need to advocate for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
which goes back to like one of Nancy's point, right? Like if you do your job, it's not going to get you the recognition as much. Like we've always heard in our jobs, we've always heard people tell that like if you want to get promoted to the next level, you
Mm-hmm.
should be operating at least 50% already in that next level to be promoted to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing goes with this as well, right? Like if you want someone to advocate for yourself, you need to advocate for yourself first. You need to like be loud, be very like exuberant, like showcase yourself, like this is what I've done, this is what I've achieved, so on and so forth, to like have someone actually advocate for yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
a note there is like be very humble, but at the same
Mm-hmm.
time also like showcase yourself. It's a very tactful way of doing that. Like people can ask like if I have to like boast about myself or if I have to like showcase myself, how can I be very humble? Like
Right.
when I say humble, like be humble in terms of like receiving feedback, be humble in
Mm-hmm.
terms of like gaining alignment from others, be humble
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like incorporating those feedback, and also be humble in terms of like pushing back when it is needed. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you disagree with someone's point of view, push
Mm-hmm.
back, but with a valid reason. So this is how I think about like advocacy, like advocating for yourself and having someone advocate for yourself. Because if you, as Rowan pointed out, right, like you have those pre-alignment meetings. The whole point of
Mm-hmm.
those pre-alignment meetings is to have someone on your side
Mm-hmm.
advocating for yourself, so that when you walk into that executive presentation, they
Mm-hmm.
have your back. It can be your manager, it can be your peer, it can be even your director,
Mm-hmm.
but they will have your back when you go into that meeting.
I want to add for advocacy, right? And this is so basic, but let's not underestimate. It is all based on competency.
Mm-hmm.
And in an environment where everyone is an A player, what does
Mm-hmm.
competency mean? Competency doesn't just mean you're going to do a good job because everyone is doing a good job.
Right.
So you almost need to always like beat yourself
Mm-hmm.
in terms of competency. Now we're not just talking about basic competency. Now we're talking about like up leveling our competency every single time.
Mm-hmm.
Then we put the advocacy on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then like recognition will kind of come more organically.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean it's been great topic and a lot of good insights coming through. One thing that I sort of struggle with is anticipation, right? How do you anticipate some of the questions that you're going to get, or some of the things that you can work towards in terms of outcomes? How do you go about deciding that? And anyone can feel free to take a stab at it. So
Yeah, I can go with this, and I think Rohan sort of touched on this with like the pre-alignment meetings, right? Like I think the first thing we need to remind ourselves with anticipation is that like am I explaining this concisely and succinctly enough for the leaders or for the executives? Because most of the times, like, the questions or like the outcomes of the meeting are a byproduct of like how well documented your presentations are, how concise and brief it is, and how to the point it is. So the first and foundational step is to get that in order, to get that in right. The second thing is the advocacies and pre-alignment, right? Like reach out to a few folks who've presented to the leadership, get get pre-alignment from them. Like think about like how the leaders actually tend to review these presentations, tend to go about with these meetings, what kind of questions would they ask. One of the things that I've always done in the past is like I've sat through meetings. Like one of my first executive meeting that I attended ever in my career was as a scribe. I just sat down there taking notes, taking observations, and what kind of questions that the leaders were asking, and like why were they asking, what was their rational motivation behind those questions. So if you are able to have an opportunity like that, if you're able to do something like that, that will give you a lot of context around like what to expect, what kind of questions to expect. So it's about like knowing, think about it as in a product sense question, like who's the user persona and what to expect of that user persona, right? Like your executives are your user personas here. Like what kind of questions would the executives, what are the challenges and what are the pain points?
Yeah,
Interesting.
that was well said. And the only thing I'll add to that is you can own the narrative by very clearly defining upfront what is the desired outcome of the meeting,
Hmm.
right? So have it in your head as to what is the ideal answer you want, but that's not kind of what I mean. I mean, if you want the leader or the executive to weigh in with a yes no answer, or if you want them to come in and solve a debate that you're having and you've presented all the options of the debate or whatever the form the meeting takes, be upfront about it. There's nothing to hide here. Things aren't just going to organically magically happen. You're not telling a story and then waiting for someone to give you an applause or a reaction. You're going in with a very specific purpose to solve for something. So define that outcome ahead of time. And when you do that, automatically you'll see that the kind of questions you're getting are snapping to that outcome and narrative.
I love that. So plus one, they're thinking, executives are thinking, what do you want from us? Unless they requested that meeting, right? But sometimes when the desire is not clear, they're thinking, okay, what do you want? How can I help? Like they're actually very eager to help. Are you looking for feedback? Are you looking for approval? Like what is it? So we could help them help us by making it very clear, okay, this is what we want from you.
Oh,
Definitely.
definitely.
Yeah, so I just want to get into some of the questions that people have asked before the meeting. So, and anybody can take a stab at answering them. So the first question is, what are some of the practices for engaging and maintaining the attention of the executives during the presentation?
I can take a stab at that. Like I think that's key things to remember is knowing your audience, right? Like as is one of the things that Rohan mentioned is like I don't like to bring in like 15 people into the presentation. I just like to bring like 5 to 7 people. So focus on your audience. Who is your audience? Why do they care about that presentation? What do you specifically want from them? What is your goal or objective? We've all been there in scenarios where like we like to write these fancy goals and fancy objectives, right? Like, but a simple objective would be like the purpose of this meeting is to gain alignment on XYZ and get leadership buy-in or sign off on implementing this. Something as simple as that. Like be very specific, be very to the point and direct on what exactly you are asking from the leaders. You start off with that, you start off something with that, right? It'll automatically get the leaders attention and leaders hooked into the meeting. The second thing is like the narrative or the story that you tell or the flow that it goes, right? Be very concise, right? Like don't beat around the bush. Don't like sometimes you have like these series of meetings and every series you repeat like what has gone all the way like 6 months to a year back. You don't have to do that. Like talk about like what was discussed in last meeting, what were the action items, and what did you come up with? Like what are you asking at this meeting? So be very concise, be very direct. The last thing is like your audience, right? Like invite people who are part of that what I call as that racy model, right? Like you have the responsible folks, you have like the accountable folks, you have the consulted and informed. Like you want the responsible folks, you want the accountable folks, and then I think the informed folks and consulted folks, you can keep them at the bottom of the list.
The the only other thing I'd add to that is, so don't piss the people off that you're presenting to. Like don't piss them off. How do you piss them off? One, Balaji covered, which is don't bury the lead. Lead with the exact answer that they're looking for, and then if they ask for it, give the more detailed context and background. That's one. Two, don't piss them off by sugarcoating everything that you're saying, right? We all love to be the heroes and heroines of our own stories. We all love to lead with good news, and we all love to get that applause. That's not what these reviews are for. You're not going to get applause. You're not there to deliver good news. I mean, of course, if there is some amazing result that you want to share, do share it. But typically, what these meetings are for is to get that critical feedback. So don't sugarcoat your narrative. And if you don't do that, you are likely not going to piss them off and therefore not lose their attention.
I love what you said. The objective of these presentations really is to get feedback from the executive team. Their feedback is valuable because they see things from a different perspective than the rest of us. So we should go in with that intent is we are here to get your feedback because we're not getting that feedback. We can't get that feedback on our own, right? So that is the most important thing. And then secondly, we also should expect that executives will show up fully for us. It is their job to show up fully for us. If they're getting distracted, of course, we do the best we can to answer their questions in a clear and concise way. But at the end of the day, though, it is also their job to not do a million things when they're in meetings like this. They should know and they need to recognize that we put in a lot of time and effort into prepping for these sessions. So the least they could do is to just show up fully and be present. And we can expect that from them.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. I think this is, I don't know, a question which I don't have the answer to yet, but I would love for you guys to take a stab at it. What strategies can I use to manage nervousness and exude confidence during the presentation?
I'll take a stab at this because I am self-proclaimed when it comes to like having anxiety and nervousness, no matter what the event is. Like even right now, I have like butterflies in my stomach. Like I'm very nervous. I'm very anxious. But one of the things that I do is like I always lead off with a joke. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Like I try to lead off with a joke. Like I've done this so many times, even in like large scale presentations or like talking on a stage in front of a large audience. Like I lead off with a joke. The other thing is like part of the thing that will help you reduce those anxiety and nervousness is like practicing, right? Again, nothing can substitute practice. Like practice over and over, like practice in front of a mirror, practice in front of like your peers. Ask your peers if they can give you critical feedback, like, or if you have a mentor at your company, ask your mentor if they can give you a critical feedback. So practice as much as possible. That's another thing that I can tell. Yeah, I essentially like two main things. Like if you can lead off with a joke, lead off with a joke. Helps set the mood a little bit lighter.
Fantastic.
This one I'm practicing. It's like preparing for the SATs. You have to train your muscles. It's muscle memory. The more we do it, the better we get. And the other thing you could do is celebrate all the little wins. And we're actually designed to respond very well to celebrations. When I look at my daughter when she was learning how to walk, when she took one step, I clapped for her. And she just kept on doing it because she liked the celebration. That's just human nature. So we practice, put in everything we get. We know we're not going to be an expert in it in the beginning, but over time we will get better and we celebrate along the way.
Great. So the next question is, how do I condense key points and provide the right details for leadership? What level of detail should I include in my presentation for executives? And what should I focus on to effectively communicate the ideas and the key messages?
Let me take a first pass at this. So I feel I don't want to sound like a broken record. I think we have covered like a pretty good breadth of things like, hey, knowing your audience, knowing your executives and stuff. But let me add another dimension to it, something that I haven't directly mentioned. And this is from a personal example of mine, and I've done this before. It regardless of whether you know the person personally that you're going to present to or not, maybe you're new in the team and you're presenting to this executive for the first time, either directly or through your manager, like through some sort of mid-management layer, if that's more appropriate, ask them that, hey, for this topic of the meeting, for this kind of an outcome, what are the things you're looking for? I think most of us, and maybe I'm being a little presumptuous, don't even think of it as an option. We just assume that, hey, we're gonna work really hard and prepare for it or guess what they want. Just ask him. Maybe there are some exceptional cases where that tactic won't work, but many a time they might actually respond and say, hey, actually what I'm looking for in this conversation is this, this, and this. And maybe it's aligned with what you prepared, great. If it's not aligned with what you prepared, it'll give you some insight into how this should be prepared differently, right? So outside of the normal do your homework and all that, that's one thing. The other thing is you have to make some assumptions, right? So I think one of the sub questions in there was, to what level of detail should the narrative be prepared? And think of it as, go into further detail on a if asked basis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your executive is operating at a higher level because they're not responsible for just one feature or one product or even a group of products. They're responsible for the whole shebang, and so they're operating at that level. And it's difficult, right? That level of context switching is difficult, but putting your empathy hat on as a PM, if you're going to empathize with your customers, try to empathize with your executives as well. First of all, realize that they're operating at that 5,000, 10,000 foot view, and try to answer questions at that level, even in your preparation. And then be armed with the details so that if they do follow up and say, okay, great, I know this at a high level, but what about that one level deeper? Or what about that 2 or 3 or 5, right? Some executives can be very hands on and they want to go down to that level of like, hey, I heard there was this one bug on this one thing. What is the status of that bug? Maybe they want to go down that deep, but you're expected to know that, right? Like you should be prepared enough to own that level of detail, but only provide that level of detail if asked.
I'll add another dimension to this. So when we're practicing and rehearsing, we should be smart in how we practice. So when we're trying to figure out, okay, what level of detail should we provide, let's first get that clear in our head. If I'm operating at 100,000 feet high, what is the update? If I'm operating at 80,000 feet, what is that? If I'm operating at 50,000 feet, what is that, right? So that is the level of rigor that we should allocate time for when we're putting in our hours when we're practicing. So we ourselves need to get clear
Mm-hmm.
on, okay, like what level, what's the granularity that
Mm-hmm.
and we should be very well versed in navigating, okay, and now I'm going way up there, now I'm coming back down a little, but not all the way down, and we need to be good at that, and that
Mm-hmm.
comes with practicing.
For sure. So I'd like to open it to people who are on the call live for questions. So if you have a question, can you please raise your hand? If not, I'll keep going with the questions that I have. So okay,
Or you can just unmute yourself and come in and talk.
yeah, okay. I'll just keep going then. I think sometimes it's a struggle, right? To understand getting buy-in from some of the executives. And I know we've talked about planning and figuring out and anticipating from a buy-in standpoint, or when it's pretty early phases. Can you guys talk about like your own experiences in terms of getting buy-in and how you sort of went about doing that? Anybody have any personal stories that they want to share?
It all goes
Uh,
back to, again, understanding what they care about. If
Mm-hmm.
we know what they care about, we can sell them a solution.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't know what they care about, we were selling to the blind. We're selling blindly, and that is never a good sales strategy.
And taking what Nancy said one step further, how do you find out what they care about? A lot of this is documented often in organizations. You may not be privy to it, or you may not be aware of it, or you may not care about it initially. But if you
Mm-hmm.
go looking for it, it's documented in things like strategy docs, vision docs, goals that are set at an org level. And it won't take up that much more of your time to say that at their level, what have they signed up to deliver on, right? Maybe it's a
Mm-hmm.
KPI that needs to be moved from X to Y. Maybe it's building and delivering some product, and
Mm-hmm.
understand the why behind it. How is it impacting the business? Because again, as product folks, yes, our main job is to build the product, but we cannot distance and divorce ourselves from how the business is actually running, right? The customer experience and them getting value is one piece of it, but the business also has to make money. And
Mm-hmm.
so looking at that full picture and then understanding what is it that motivates these executives. That's all I wanted to add, is that that's how you find out.
Love that.
Yeah,
Plus
yeah.
one.
Yeah, plus one to Rohan's point. I can perhaps share a small example that would allude to that. Like we at Amazon, my first team when I was working on this robotics product, I was part of the customer experience team, but I used to work very closely with the business team who was building that robotics product. And so this goes back to like what our ask is. Our ask was like we wanted the business team to fund the customer support or fund the customer experience team for all the customer support activities that we were building for their product. Now, we were asking for like close to $1 million of funding, like funding specifically for like, I think 100 to 200 concierge agents. Now you could think about like, why would the business has already spent so much money in building a product? Why would the business care about like spending an extra $1 million to fund a customer support team, which is bottom of the chain? But you'll have to like go back and help them see the bigger picture. The bigger picture is they care about receiving like 4.5 stars or 4.8 stars. That was one of their success metrics. In like when they launched this product, they wanted that kind of a rating or review. And in order for that, we wanted to be, and this was a heavy price point product, we wanted to provide concierge support where they get like specifically a dedicated customer support agent working on the issue, because we believe that that would greatly enhance the customer experience. So it goes back to the point on like understanding the why and tying it to like what you're asking.
I have one more question, and I don't know if you guys have more time beyond 1 o'clock, but I'll try to keep it short. So I'll make it into a two-part story then. So one question was, how much of your presentations are visual, and how much sort of weightage do you put into the visuals itself? And the last part of the question is, if you want a few things that people want to take away from this presentation, what would they be? So it's a two-part question, and feel free to answer that. So.
I am actually very passionate about the first question. And again, it depends on the executive. One time I worked for an executive who was a very visual person. He hated reading slides. And so for him, my slides have very little words. And I performed pretty well when I was working for that executive. It's again, it goes back to understanding how do they operate, and then you deliver the solution accordingly.
Yeah, in my experience, you use what you need, right? I mentioned earlier, for example, Amazon is a very heavy writing culture, but even at Amazon, if a chart tells the story better, you add the chart in as well. But I think if for whatever reason you realize, as Nancy alluded to, like if you realize that the people you're presenting to also care about the visual appeal, and there are some situations where it could matter, like if you're presenting to investors or board members, maybe there are people who also care about the full presentation package. Try to get that information ahead of time, and that comes from, again, planning, preparation, and research.
Okay, so the last question is takeaways. I know we touched up on a lot of aspect, tactics, mindset, anticipation, preparation, advocacy. So I want people to take away a few things, a few key things that you guys would want to highlight on. So who wants to take a stab
I'll
at it?
go first, but I'll just say one thing. When you go into a presentation and you're preparing for it, remember nobody knows more about that topic than you do.
Hmm.
And if you're not there yet, then use that time to get to that point, right? Because if you're presenting to an executive on a topic, you own that. And so once you get to that place where no one knows more about it than you do, the confidence should, in most cases, automatically arrive with that.
All right, thank you.
I'm gonna insert a quote from Balaji. He said, he said, nothing takes you can't substitute practicing with anything else. I don't know what if he used these words, but that was the gist of what he said. Can't overemphasize the need in practicing and prepping and the research that goes into one executive presentation. And what I said earlier is our macro goal really should be on communication skills all around and not just zero in on executive presentation skills.
All right. Thank you for that, Nancy. Balaji.
Well, Nancy stole what I wanted to tell. So, gosh, this is on the spot. But like, so one thing that I to actually two takeaways, right? Like, one is the art of storytelling. That's very key to product management, actually, but it's also key to like executive presentations. Like, what is the story that you're actually telling? What are you trying to get out of the story, right? Like, I mean, we've all been there. Like, we've learned stories from our parents, or if you have kids, like you tell stories to your kids. But there's a subtle thing that you want to learn from them. Like, hey, I'm telling you this story because I want you to like learn about empathy, learn about like compassion, something. So your story has to have that goal, what you're trying to tell. So that's one thing. The second thing I'd say is, apart from, don't like overcomplicate and overthink. Like, it's okay. Like, you've done your best, go into the meeting, but it's important to walk away with valuable feedback, and important to like incorporate that feedback in the future presentations. So that if you're making the same mistakes over and over, then there's something fundamentally wrong. Like, you want to like incorporate the feedback that you get so that you get better with every presentation.
All right.
That's such an amazing point to end on. I absolutely love that, because I think I made the mistake in this conversation of like portraying this picture of like, hey, if you do all the preparation, you're going to go in as Thor and hit a home run in the presentation. But the reality of it is there will naturally be errors and mistakes. And I think what you said really summed it up beautifully.
Love that.
All right. Thank you all for coming in and devoting your time for the panelists and the people who joined us. And here is to looking for more such informative sessions. And let's see how we can make that happen. So,
Yes. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Sanjay,
Sanjay.
for
Yeah,
moderating. You're
Yeah,
so good at this.
I know.
thank you so much for moderating.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you,
thanks.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.